Night 1 of 2 episodes of Fantasy Suite Dates is complete, and there were twists and turns that no one saw coming. Hey guys, and welcome back to another shared news. We have to dive into everything that episode 1 of 2 had in store for us. But before we get into it, if you're new here, make sure to subscribe to our channel so you never miss out on any future videos. Now, when ABC announced that they were going to be splitting Fantasy Suites into 2 nights, I wasn't sure if there would be enough footage to make both nights really captivating episodes. But I was wrong. And I'm honestly so glad that we got more time with each of the guys, because if I'm being honest, Hometown Dates felt a little bit rushed, and poor Avon wasn't even included in the full episode cut. So we completed night 1, and let's just dive right into it because a lot went down. We start the episode in Riviera Maya, Mexico, which is a beautiful new location to have these dates with, and Gabby and Rachel meet up initially for some one-on-one girl time. They discuss that this was the moment, or this was the week during Clayton's season where everything went haywire. We can't forget the conversation between Susie and Clayton about Fantasy Suite dates, which resulted in Susie being sent home, which resulted in the rose ceremony from Down Under, which resulted in so many tears, broken nails, confusion, arguments, will theys, won't theys, and a chaotic season. So let's just hope that this season doesn't end the same way. We move straight into Gabby and Erich's Fantasy Suite date. They immediately meet up and go to a kind of cliff diving, cliff jumping, platform jumping off type of activity. All of the signs are in Spanish, and when Gabby asks him if he knows what it means and he says no, she says it means take off your clothes. Of course, she's kidding, but I love the flirtation between these two. They do get into their swimsuits, and Gabby's swimsuit had to be completely blacked out on camera, leaving a lot up to the imagination. They jump off various heights of these kind of platforms and finally go up to the tallest platform, where Gabby kind of has a nervous breakdown and isn't sure she's going to be able to do it. Now, she kind of compares the jumping off of this high platform as similar to jumping into a relationship, as falling in love. It's nerve-wracking, and you have to do it with someone who makes you feel safe, which is exactly what Erich is to her. She said that with Erich, she feels like she can be all the different sides of herself in one breath. Now, they end up jumping off the platform together and have an amazing time, and then they start discussing Erich's hometown date. Erich said that his family is completely obsessed with Gabby, and she said, and I them. At their dinner portion, Erich says he doesn't want to leave here without her and is in love with Gabby, and Gabby says she does see a future with Erich. They end up going to the Fantasy Suite together, and then they kind of have an interesting moment the next day where she says, "You know how I feel?" And Erich says, "Confused," to which she says, "You think I'm confused?" And he says, "Well, I'm confused." So there's a little bit of miscommunication maybe in the morning of exactly where the two of them are at, but overall this seemed like a really solid date to me, and it's clear that neither of them really wanted to say goodbye. They didn't want to leave each other, and I think Erich might be a little nervous for her spending some other nights with the other men that she has left. Now we go straight into Rachel's first Fantasy Suite date with Avon. They have a kind of yacht date. They go out on this beautiful ship. They apply sunscreen to each other. It's like picturesque moment. And during this time, Jesse Palmer actually checks in with Tino, and he says that the waiting game is killing him. Now, this is some great editing on behalf of the Bachelor team, the ABC team, because they paired it up so that when Avon and Rachel are talking about Avon's hometown date, Jesse and Tino are talking about his. Obviously, we saw that they were very different hometown dates. Avon's family is head over heels in love with Rachel, and Tino's parents were not as thrilled. So you can definitely see the difference between the two men, between the two dates, and why Rachel might be feeling a little bit more confident joining Avon's family than she is Tino's. Avon ends up telling Rachel that he is ready to be engaged and that she's made that easy for him to know. And Rachel tells Avon that she is falling in love with him. Now, this is a direct callback to her conversation with Gabby at the beginning of the episode, where she says she is feeling that way towards Avon. She just hasn't had the time to tell him and wasn't able to have the time to tell him specifically on his hometown date, but she finally found the time and the words, and she ends up saying after their Fantasy Suite date that Avon is the full package. But just when we think maybe Rachel's falling for Aven and he might be pulling forward to become her frontrunner, we are thrown right into Rachel and Tino's fantasy date. Now they meet in the jungle, they end up going horseback riding together, and it seems like everything's going kind of well, but you can also tell that Rachel does want to talk about the hometown date and wants to get that off of her chest. Now, she ends up talking to him about her concerns about his family and how the date went, and Tinos ends up saying that his dad doesn't understand him in terms of relationships, and that they're just concerned about the environment and the speed at which they're moving, as opposed to being concerned with Rachel herself. And he even has a little comment where he says, "I'm sure your parents felt the same way," a direct callback to her hometown date with Clayton. And she ends up asking him a very blunt question of if they get engaged and if they finish the season together, will his parents be upset or mad at him? He tells her, quote, "They're not going to be mad at you or me, 100%. I know they're going to come around. I can't go home without you at this point. I love you, Rachel." To which she says, "I love you too. I really do." And they end up going to the fantasy suite together, and all of our faith in Tino and Rachel has been restored. Obviously, it's gonna be a challenge if they end up together and if his parents aren't as supportive as he says they will be, but I guess that's a problem for another day. Now, our next fantasy suite date is between Gabby and Johnny. They end up going out on a sailboat, and Johnny has a quote that I had to write down because it was so funny to me. He said, quote, "Gabby is the dopest girl I think I've ever hung with." So if that's not something to just cross-stitch on a pillow, I'm not sure what is. They discuss that he doesn't actually open up quickly. It takes him a long time, takes him a while to open up and be vulnerable with people, but that Gabby makes him want to be a better man. But when Gabby starts asking him about the future and how he's feeling and what he's ready for, Johnny says he doesn't know about the end result or if he's really ready to be engaged. He said it's such a quick process and that he is falling in love with her, but it's too fast and he just doesn't know if he can get there. Now, Gabby is really ready. We saw that on Clayton's season. We've seen that even more on her own season. And to which Johnny says, he can see himself falling in love with her, but he's not sure if he can really bring 100% to the table. And if he can't, does he really want to drag her through that? Now, at this point, Gabby is really upset. She takes some time away. She walks away. She talks about the fact that he can't commit, and she really wants someone who can commit and that she is 100% in it, she is ready, but she wants someone who feels the same way she does. She ends up returning to Johnny. He asks if she's okay. She says no. And they end up kind of deciding that they want two different things. And Gabby says, "I think if it was a different time for both of us, then we could be so, so great." So it's clear they still have feelings toward each other. They can still maybe see a future with each other, but that this process and this time in each of their individual lives are not matching up at this point. So they end up actually parting ways on the beach, and they don't go to a dinner portion, they don't go to a fantasy suite, and Johnny goes home. The relationship between Gabby and Johnny is finished. Now at this point, we see another clip of Jesse Palmer doing a little check-in. Jesse checks in with Jason, and Jason isn't sure he's in love. Jason says he doesn't feel like he's at the point to be engaged and that he's taking it day by day, but it's hard for him to see an engagement happening within the next 2 weeks. So obviously this was placed here from an editing perspective right after Johnny's date for us to have some real instilled fear for Gabby. If two of her men, one of which she just sent home, really aren't ready for an engagement, she's just left with Erich. But then we get even more afraid because she gets a note to her hotel room asking her to meet up with a random stranger on the bridge. She ends up going to the bridge. Erich is waiting for her. She jokes that she thought maybe it was going to be her grandpa. Didn't expect Erich to be there, but it starts as a really nice surprise. Until Erich brings up that him picturing her with these other guys is really hard on him. You immediately see Gabby's face fall. She is definitely taken aback, and Gabby ends up telling him, quote, "In the spirit of being honest, we talked about this off camera." She then says that Erich expressed in fantasy suites that this week feels like she's cheating on him. Now, obviously, we saw that in the teaser for this episode, but we didn't know who thought that it was feeling like cheating, but now we know it was Erich. And I can totally understand her surprise and her frustration if he's bringing up a conversation that they'd already had in fantasy suites, off camera, between the two of them. Why is he bringing it up now? Why does he need this attention? Why does he need it to be on camera? The whole thing didn't sit well with me, nor did it sit well with Gabby. and you can see that their once strong foundation is kind of crumbling around the edges. She said in an interview, "Why do I always have to defend myself, and why don't you trust what we have?" She also says that, "I feel like he was testing me, and that's not something you do with someone you love." Then she starts saying things like, "My person might not be here, and this feels like the end for me." Now, we're kind of left on this cliffhanger of an episode. That's where this episode ends. And I'm a bit panicked for Gabby, because if they can't get this figured out, if they can't talk this through and get back on the same page, if Johnny's been sent home and we know Jason isn't ready for an engagement, I don't know what Gabby is going to be doing at the finale. I don't know who is going to be proposing, and it's got me a little nervous. Now, obviously next week we get to also see Rachel's fantasy suite date with Zach. That's gonna be dramatic. We've seen that conversation between him and Jesse Palmer also teased. He talks about a 180 that he goes into after fantasy suites. We have a little soundbite of Rachel saying, "You changed your mind after fantasy suites." So that could be Zach, that could be Tino. It could be Avon, we really don't know. And I think at this point, we know that Gabby's top pick might be Erich, but this last conversation might be the end of their relationship as well. So does Gabby leave single? This whole episode was crazy to me, left on such a cliffhanger. I can't wait for the next episode of Fantasy Suites so that we can get all of this sorted out. But I just want to know your guys' thoughts down in the comments below on this episode, on what we think we're going to see next episode, maybe even the finale or after the final rose. I've been thrown for a loop so many times this season, I don't even know which way is up. So put your thoughts down in the comments, and before you go, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel so you never miss out on any future videos. I'm your host, Allison Van Dam. Thank you so much for watching another Bachelor recap. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.